Credit River Township in Minnesota. So yeah, it's a very small place, population 3,895. And I've read about this case before, many years ago, and just forgot about it. But it's really important. I did quite a bit of research yesterday. I read there's a Wikipedia entry which I'll go through about it, and there's an article as well about it. And I also went on to find the text of the decision. It's a PDF file written by the Justice of the Peace, Justice Martin V. Mahoney, right? So let's go through the Wikipedia entry about this story, what they say. So the case is First National Bank of Montgomery versus Jerome Daley. It says here, December 9th, 1968, Justice Court, Credit River Township, Scott County, Minnesota, also known as the Credit River case, was a case tried before a Justice of the Peace in Minnesota in 1968. The decision in that case is sometimes cited by opponents of the United States banking system. Not opponents, but people who are trying to expose the truth, I would say. The trial. An attorney named Jerome Daley was a defendant in a civil case in Credit River Township, Scott County, Minnesota, heard on December 9th, 1968. The plaintiff was the First National Bank of Montgomery, which had foreclosed on Daley's property for non-payment of the mortgage and was seeking to evict him from the property. It goes on to say, Daley based his defense on the argument that the bank had not actually loaned him any money, but had simply created credit on its book. Daley argued that the bank had thus not given him anything of value and was not entitled to the property that secured the loan. The jury and the Justice of the Peace, Martin V. Mahoney, agreed with this argument. The jury returned a verdict for the defendant, and the Justice of the Peace declared that the mortgage was null and void and that the bank was not entitled to possession of the property. The justice admitted in his order that his decision might run counter to provisions in the Minnesota Constitution and some Minnesota statutes, but contended that such provisions were repugnant to the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights in the Minnesota Constitution. So this is what they say about the result, and this is what I'm not very clear about, but we'll come to another point that's really important, I think, later, that it has not been talked about when you read about this case. The result, it says the immediate effect of the decision would have been that Daley would not have been required to pay the mortgage debt or relinquish the property. However, the bank appealed the next day, and the decision was ultimately nullified on the grounds that a Justice of the Peace did not have the power to make such a ruling. So this is what Wikipedia say. They say that it was nullified and everything. They talk about Jerome Daley's disbarment and criminal convictions. So I'm not going to go through that. So Wikipedia, in my opinion, is giving some of the arguments, but they're not really, how can I say, looking at the whole picture. So then there's a article here, which I'll go through as well. This might take a while, but this is very interesting. It's on hubpages.com, and it says, this is from January 17th, 2018 by PJK_artist. And he says, judge poisoned after ruling bank foreclosure is illegal and all mortgages are null and void. So yes, Justice Mahoney, Justice of the Peace Mahoney, did die in 1969. He was only about 54. So you can see there, he did die. It's a true story. You can see his gravestone. So let's go through that article. So he calls it, this guy calls it the greatest crime against humanity. says, with the advance of the internet in the 80s, knowledge no longer being restricted to well-controlled sources, one of the things that I discovered was the facts about the way money works in this world. We've all heard the various sayings about 5% of the world's population holding 95% of the world's wealth, but not many are sure how and why this is our reality. Doing some online research about what is money and how it is created will inevitably lead one to discover that surprisingly fraudulent ways in which banks create money and make loans. Because the world's banking systems, as they exist now, continue to cause pain and suffering in generation after generation of mankind, I consider the insidious con job of a banking and monetary system to be the greatest crime against humanity. This is what he says. Rather than reiterate the way money should work and the way it does work, and rather than rewrite the advantages and disadvantages of monetary reform, I urge you to view the various hub pages and online materials to educate yourself. So I'll jump here. He talks about Zeitgeist, the documentary, but I'll go straight to the story here. One aspect of the Zeitgeist movie I would like to devote this hub page to is referred to as the Credit River decision, or the case of Jerome Daley versus the state of Wisconsin. Case of Jerome Daley versus the state of Wisconsin. In this case, Jerome Daley defended himself against a lawsuit brought by a bank holding the mortgage on his house. Mr. Daley had defaulted on the mortgage, and the bank was suing to foreclose and take his house. Goes on to say, unfortunately for the bank, even though it was 1969 and all good little citizens were doing as they were told, never daring to question any kind of authority, Mr. Daley was well educated in the way banks create money. Mr. Daley knew that when a bank makes a loan, it instantly creates money by the stroke of a pen in a ledger, which then is transferred to the borrower's account. And of course, the borrower has to pay back the loan with real money plus interest. By real money, I think he means that you have to work for it to earn that money, right? This, of course, is the big problem, simply stated. Mr. Daley, also being a lawyer, knew very well about the law of consideration, meaning essentially that a contract was null and void if both parties are not exchanging something of inherent value. So that's the law of consideration. That's very interesting. Mr. Daley argued and somehow got the bank to admit that they created the money with the stroke of a pen at the time of the loan, and that there was no actual official law empowering them to do so. So yeah, the official that defended the bank, it was a Mr. Morgan, he said that actually in court. Since the bank did not put up anything of value other than the ink from the pen for Mr. Daley's home mortgage, there was no consideration, the law of consideration. Therefore, the mortgage agreement was null and void. Justice of the Peace Martin v. Mahoney ruled against the bank and denied the foreclosure. Mr. Daley kept his house and paid no more mortgage. 6 months later, Justice Mahoney was found dead, allegedly by poison, and Mr. Daley was disbarred and never practiced law again. So that's the story. And thing is, I was looking through, and I'm going to put this in the description, a link to this. This is the whole case here, written by Justice Mahoney. He gives his arguments and everything. And I was going through it, through the whole case, and I got almost to the end. I think it was on page 14 of 16. This is archive.org. It's in archive.org. And there's a section here that says, and this is what, got me thinking also about this case and why it came about in 1968. It says, the common law requires a lawful consideration, so law of consideration again, for any contract or note. These notes are void for failure of a lawful consideration at common law. So this is common law, right? Entirely apart from any constitutional considerations. Upon this ground, the notes are ineffectual for any purpose. These are the Federal Reserve notes, right? This seems to be the principal objection to paper fiat money and the cause of its depreciation and failure down through the ages. If allowed to continue, Federal Reserve notes will meet the same fate. From the evidence introduced on January 22nd, 1969, this court finds that as of March 18th, 1968, all gold and silver backing is removed from Federal Reserve notes. So there you go. Very important date, March 18th, 1968. And it's interesting that this case was brought in 1968 after that. So what happened on March 18th, 1968? Because we usually look at 1933, when FDR confiscated all gold. We say that U.S. went off the gold standard. It did, not completely though. It went off the gold standard in that people in the United States could not convert their banknotes anymore, but the system was still backed by gold, right? So up until 1968, if you look here, and this is from Wikipedia, and I know Wikipedia sometimes can't be relied upon, but in this case it can, because it's just something that happened in Congress. The United States departed from the gold standard by eliminating the mandate that U.S. currency deposits be backed by the U.S. gold reserve at the rate of 25 cents per dollar, and eliminated the requirement for backing notes. So there you go. That's why that date is so important. And Justice Mahoney came up with it. You see, there are people out there who know about this or knew about this back then, 50 years ago, and they took it, how can I say, to court. But for some reason, you know, it never sees the light of day. The judge that made the judgment or the decision died a few months later. We don't know if it was natural causes or anything, but and apparently the case was overturned by another court. That's what it says. The Credit River, case, which shows that the Federal Reserve notes are really not really. They're against common law. There's no consideration behind them. But unfortunately, the judicial system is compromised, and if you try to bring a case like that, they'll probably drop it. So let's hope that more and more people find out about this, learn about the monetary system, about the Federal Reserve, how it's unconstitutional, and more people wake up. And that's what I'm here to do, not only for the Federal Reserve, but also for the Bank of England. The same thing is going on everywhere in the world. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Steemit, and on DTube. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.